Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. We've got a big show for you tonight. We've got an epic guest who agreed to come on, and we thank him a lot for that. Captain Dan Hanley, a former airline pilot, has agreed to come on and give us his opinion on this world-changing event, 9/11. So welcome to the show. This is National Housing Party, United Kingdom. This is our channel. John Lawrence can't make it tonight. Paul Rimmer can't make it tonight. So we're going to be analysing 9/11 tonight. And, you know, I make no secret about this, that I believe that the chief suspects of this crime, where nearly 3,000 civilians died, the chief suspects are Mossad, which is the Israeli intelligence service. That's my opinion. I've made no secret about that in the past. But what people need to remember is that 9/11 was such a big event. It's changed our lives in the West so much. It's unbelievable. So, the war in Afghanistan, which went on for years and years, was a repercussion of that. Then it was the invasion of Iraq, and then they destabilized Libya, used NATO Air Force to attack Libya because of what they said, because of 9/11. Tried to destabilize Assad and remove Assad. That failed, and we've had this war on terror ever since. So I learned most of my stuff from somebody called Christopher Bollin, and he was the one who really opened my eyes to it all. But the actual time when I decided to look into it, I was a regular attendee at Speaker's Corner, and before I attended there, I heard of these stories about 9/11, that it was an inside job, etc. But I didn't believe it, and I wouldn't even entertain listening to someone for too long about it. When I went to Speaker's Corner, many people, everyone I asked about 9/11, they said it was an inside job. And I kind of thought, well, I'm going to have to look into this because there's so many people saying this to me now. I'm going to have a look into it. And that's when I came across Christopher Bollin. And check him out on YouTube, on Rumble, Odysee, wherever you want to find him, and just listen to his talks about it. But we're going to cover a lot of stuff tonight. Dan has kindly come on to give his story. He was an airline pilot. On the day of 9/11, he was actually in Newark Airport. And we're going to go over to Dan in a minute. We're just waiting for more people to come on. So just would like to say hello to everyone in the chat. Timmy Bobbinson, Rory Herbert, Budgie Berger, Serena, Steve Wild, nice to see you there. Nick Wilson. Obviously, we got the American election coming up very soon. And Dan is American. And what do you think is going to happen in the election, Dan?
Oh, your guess is as good as mine, Pat. It's who's going to run, or is there going to be an election? Some people think we won't even get there, that there'll be a false flag somewhere in the world. They'll declare martial law, delay the election, and impose new restrictions on our freedom. Others believe that Joe Biden's going to step down, and that either Hillary Clinton or Michelle Obama is going to take his place. But in light of what's happened in the past, I've lost all faith and trust in the U.S. election process myself, Pat.
Yeah. I mean, me personally, I was very supportive of Donald Trump in 2016, but he's declared his Zionist credentials so much recently that I'm finding it very difficult to support him. There is some things I like about him still. He takes on the politically correct media, but the bottom line is he was willing to put American troops on the line for Israel, which I think is wrong, when he killed that Iranian commander, Soleimani. That could have started a big war, and it was very risky what he did there. But let's get into this discussion. There's there's a lot of people in the chat there now. That's good to see everyone. And hello there, Farmers Movement Cornwall. Nice to see you there. And Tommy Trump, nice to see you there. Mark Williams, hello there. So just to let everyone know, this stream is going to be all about 9/11, and retired Captain Dan Hanley has kindly come on to speak to us. You know, he's not getting paid or anything. He's passionate about this subject, so am I. I'm fascinated by this subject, and we're gonna go right into it. And Dan's gonna start his story now, and I'll hand it over to you, Dan.
Okay, Pat. Thanks for having me on the program, and hello everyone in the chat room. I'll tell you a little bit about myself first. I wanted to be a pilot ever since I was a little kid, and I flew my whole career. But I started out at age 19 in 1968, 57 years ago, as a civilian pilot with the intent of becoming a commercial pilot. And I got my private commercial instrument and multi-engine rating by 1970, went on to a 4-year school, got my degree. But when I got out, the Vietnam War was still raging, and I was either going to get drafted in the Army or go into one of the other branches, and I chose naval aviation. And so I entered naval aviation in 1973, got my wings in 74, and over the next 10 years, I flew 4 different naval aircraft. And there's a bit of an overlap here, but in 78, I was hired by United Airlines as a pilot. And over the course of the next 25 years, I flew 6 different commercial jet aircraft. So all total, I flew 15 different aircraft, accruing 20,000 flight hours over a 35-year career span. Now, it all ended tragically for me in 2003, when after 9/11, I started speaking out about 9/11 related safety and security issues, and was illegally terminated by United and the FAA. But that would take a whole program to go.
Sorry, Dan, could you just tell the audience what FAA is?
Oh, Federal Aviation Administration. And United Airlines management grounded me for life as a pilot because I was speaking out on controversial issues, and they had to shut me up. So I fought that for 5 years with the U.S. government and got nowhere with it. I went to every level and branch of the U.S. government that was relevant and got nowhere with it. So they closed my case without interviewing any of my witnesses or reviewing any of my evidence. And I paid dearly for it because it cost me ultimately a 27-year good marriage, which alienated my 2 kids who blame me for the divorce, still believe the official 9/11 story, think I'm a whacked out conspiracy nut. They don't talk to me. I lost $4 million.
Dan, could I just jump in there for 1 second?
Sure.
So the reason what was it, the FAA?
It was the FAA working in collusion with the United Airlines management.
Yeah. The FAA were basically, you spoke out saying that these planes couldn't have been hijacked by these hijackers.
No, it wasn't that. I was pointing out holes in the security system, which would ultimately show that it was a farce. That 9/11 couldn't have come down. They would have taken these security precautions, but they didn't. So that's why they had to shut me up. Initially, they just pulled me off the line and said I had to come in and talk to them. And the union says, we're not going to represent you. So I said, well, I've got to bring lawyers in because this is a sensitive issue. And they said no. So we were at an impasse, and they put me on sick list. And still, I was trying to negotiate some kind of an agreement here, and they would hear nothing of it. And ultimately, my chief pilot in New York called me and said, Dan, I just ran into the chief flight surgeon out in Denver. And he said, is Hanley one of yours? And I said, yes. And he says, put the son of a bitch on sick list. So he says, Dan, I'm sorry, my hands are tied on this. This came from up on top. And I said, well, I don't blame you. I know what's going on here. So I knew, based on past experience and what the union lawyers had told me, that they were going to try to take me out. If they couldn't get me professionally and medically, they'd get me psychologically or otherwise. Well, I never flunked a check ride in my life, so professionally they couldn't touch me. I never flunked a fight physical in my life, so I thought they're going to come after me psychologically because I saw they had done this to other people and removed them from the property. So I was living in Atlanta at the time, and I went to the best mental health professionals I could find, a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and said, here's where I am with United. Here's what they're going to try to do to me. I'll come for counseling sessions, whatever tests you want to give me to prove that I'm mentally stable, which they did. And I'll tell the chat room or anybody else listening, I am mentally stable because I've done these programs before, and they say, I'm glad he's not flying anymore. He's mentally unstable, but I'm not. So it's a way they use of getting rid of me. So that's what they did. They had me come up to Chicago, go see a mental health professional who said I was bipolar, which was absurd because I'd only met her for like 15 minutes. So it was a setup. And when I got away from Chicago, I knew the skids were greased because I had a Union Aero Medical representative, a psychiatrist, who said, look, we've already talked to the FAA, we're going to ground you, and that was the end of it. So it also destroyed a 35-year career and my reputation as a pilot. So I paid a heavy price doing what I thought was right. There's more to the story, but I won't get into it because I've taken an hour-long program to talk about it. But getting back to my resume that I just gave you, I'm not boasting on my accomplishments. I'm only saying it because with all my experience, I can unequivocally say without reservation or embarrassment that I could not have flown the 9/11 flight profiles, and neither could the alleged Muslim hijackers. They weren't qualified in the airplane, and we'll get into more of that later. But there's 300,000 pilots roughly on the planet. Now, why didn't they speak up? Well, they weren't given the opportunity. And why? Because there was one man named Philip Zelikow, a neocon Zionist named Philip Zelikow, who was the filter for the 9/11 Commission. Now, let me step back for a minute and talk about the 9/11.
Let me just tell the audience that the 9/11 Commission was it a big inquiry about the whole event?
Right. Let me tell you about the 9/11 Commission, Pat.
Go on.
Bush and Cheney blocked it. It would have never occurred had the next of kin not stepped up and demanded it. And they fought them tooth and nail all the way up until 14 months after the event. The government finally caved and said, okay, we'll have the 9/11 Commission. And initially they assigned as the commissioner Henry Kissinger. And the next of kin says, there's a conflict of interest here. So he stepped down and two other gents took his place. But I interviewed a man a couple of years ago who lives in Vancouver named Ray McGinnis, and he wrote a book called Unanswered Questions as a subtitle also. I think it's something like the questions the 9/11 next of kin wanted answered, but the 9/11 Commission didn't. But they came forth with over 100 questions for the 9/11 Commission to answer. And of that 100 questions, 70% of them were ignored, and of the remaining 30%, only 10% were answered adequately. Why? Philip Zelikow. He was the one that decided what witnesses were going to come before the commission to testify. So I mentioned his name because even though there's 300,000 pilots in the world, and even though they should have been permitted to testify before the commission as to the absurdity of it all, they were denied the opportunity because of Philip Zelikow. So not one pilot was permitted to testify as to the ludicrous notion that these pilots actually flew the aircraft. So what did we do? We decided that we were going to...
Let me just stop you there for a sec. So this Philip Zelikow is a Zionist. He was put in charge of the 9/11 Commission, which was supposed to be the inquiry, and lots of the relatives of people who died on that day were demanding to ask questions, and he wasn't allowing it. Is that correct?
That's exactly correct. And I'll get into him later because he also suppressed other key evidence with the 9/11 Commission, along with the FBI, but we can talk about that later. But I just wanted to bring him up now because 300,000 pilots, that's why you never heard anything about it, because the government said, look, we know who the 19 hijackers are. We know them by name. We know what countries they came from. We know where they trained. They took this, I mean, it was mainly training in light single engine prop job aircraft. Okay, but
Propellered aircraft.
yeah, we believe that the reason. Now, Pat, you fell for the story, right? You believed it until you start questioning it. You believed that the hijackers flew the airplane.
Correct. I believe the official story at the beginning.
No.
Yes.
Well, 99% of the population, we believe, the pilots believe, the reason they fell for it is that they're not pilots, and they cannot conceive of the absurdity of this ludicrous notion that those pilots flew the aircraft. So that's why we feel like the government got away from it, and the mainstream media went right along with them. So they.
So let me just clarify. Let me just clarify to the audience. So all these alleged 19 hijackers were learning how to fly propellered planes, not jet planes. Is that correct, Dan?
Yeah, but it wasn't all 19 of them. Just a few select individuals were. But,
so let me just quickly tell the audience. So the story is that these hijackers learned to fly propellered planes, and they'd never flown jet planes, and so the first time they ever flew a big jumbo jet was the day they hijacked it and then managed to fly it into the buildings. That's what the official story is trying to tell us. And over to you, Dan.
Right. So what a small group of us got together and said, look, we as we gathered more and more information on this, we said, look, we know it's 18 years after the fact because we started this about 5 years ago. But let's go forward, not with the hope of getting our information before a commission, but bring it before the court of public opinion so they can judge for themselves as to what actually occurred. And that's what we've been doing. And what started out as I started out as a Facebook group called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. Then we got a blog talk radio program we had going, but we couldn't get enough volunteer pilots to come on to talk about it. So I was working with a few guys, and I said, we need a website. So we came up with a website and established this grassroots organization. Now, I'm the director and international public spokesperson for this grassroots organization called 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. And the website I just mentioned is at 911pilot.org, if you want to call that up, because I'll be referring to it some.
Yeah, I've just put it in the chat. I've just put it in the chat for you.
Okay, good. If you want to refer to that, I'll be going back to that periodically. But if you look at the top of the page, we have a YouTube channel at 911 Pilots. So if you want to look, it's got 57 videos on it. And we quit putting some videos on because YouTube was saying it was hate speech, which it wasn't. But anyhow, at the top of the page, there's a Join Us tab. Now, we don't just we don't want just pilots to join us. We want to invite members of the general public to join us as well. And all we need is your name and email address, and we'll put you on our mailing list. And then we have a Contact Us tab. You can contact us, and we'll try to get back to you, depending upon the volume of emails we're receiving at the time. But the purpose, now, I don't want to lose the audience because some people will say you can't remote control an airplane, but the purpose of our organization is to show that the Muslim hijackers weren't in control of the aircraft, but that the aircraft were electronically hijacked and remotely controlled through employment of the system called the uninterruptible autopilot that I'll talk about in a minute, that enables a remote source to take complete control of the aircraft autopilot and flight management computer and guide it to its designated target. And once this system,
okay, Dan, let me just clarify to the audience. So what Dan's saying is that these hijackers did not hijack these planes, and they were remote controlly hijacked by somebody else, and they took control of these planes. Over to you, Dan.
Exactly. So once the system's engaged, the pilots can't disconnect the system. There's one way of engaging an autopilot, and that's by turning on the switch. And there's about 4 ways of disengaging it. You can turn the switch back off, but there's a little button on the steering wheel of the yoke you can press. That'll disengage it. If you apply a 70-pound or greater force on one of the controls, that'll disengage it. Or if you pull the circuit breaker to remove electrical power from the system, that'll disengage the autopilot. Well, once this uninterruptible autopilot system is engaged, none of that works. Even if you pulled every circuit breaker on the airplane, it's got its own power source, so you can't unpower the system. So I'll get into discussing that in a minute, but that's our purpose. Our goal has been to recruit, one of our goals has been recruit highly trained and experienced pilots, whether they're active or retired military or civilian, from around the world, which we've had some success in doing, who will attest on film, on camera, to be put on social media and our website, that not only could the hijackers not have flown the airplanes, but they could not have flown them themselves, just like I just mentioned I couldn't. Okay, and we'll get into the profiles here in a minute also. But when I hope you haven't, I hope I haven't tuned anyone out talking about remote control airplanes, and I want to get into the remote control page.
Well, let me just say something, Dan. So in Gaza at the moment, Hamas are hijacking quite a few of the Israeli drones. They're jamming them with electronic systems and then getting control of the drone. So presumably it's a similar thing. What you're suggesting happened on 9/11 back then, and you know, that technology could have easily been available back then by you know, the world's top technicians.
Right. That's what I want to get into here, Pat, because most people don't realize, but remote control of large aircraft dates back over 80 years to 1944, when towards the end of World War II, the U.S. Army Air Corps launched Operation Aphrodite in Europe. It was actually in the UK they launched this. And what they did was gutted out OB-17s. They gutted them out to lighten the weight of the aircraft so they could load it with 30,000 pounds of Torpex, which is a highly incendiary compound. Now, pilots were required to make the takeoff, but once they got up in the air, they'd bail out of the aircraft, and these aircraft were remotely guided to German targets in Europe. Now, this was 80 years ago that this happened. And we mentioned on the website that Joe Kennedy, JFK's older brother, was actually killed on one of these top secret missions when the airplane blew up due to a malfunction before it could bail out of the aircraft. And we got a short 8-minute film clip on that on the website page, on the remote control page. And if you got the website up, at the top of the page, there's menu. If you click on it, there's a whole bunch of drop-down menu items, okay? And I'm covering remote control right now. So now there's a bunch of different examples we could give, but we only cite a couple of them here to give you, you'll get the point when I talk about it here. But if you jump ahead 40 years to 1984, NASA and the Federal Aviation Administration conducted a joint crash test experiment in a remote location where they took a big 4-engine, I'm looking at a chat room thing, took a 4-engine Boeing 720, loaded it up with crash dummies and a camera because they wanted to test crew and passenger survivability in the event of a crash landing. Now, they took this airplane off by remote control, flew it around the pattern several times before they intentionally crash landed the aircraft. Now, this was 17 years before 9/11. I could go back to 1962 and talk about Operation Northwoods, where Kennedy was presented with a plan, among other things, to create a false flag involving remote control of aircraft over Cuba that they were going to blow up and blame it on the Cubans so they could attack them. But I won't go into detail on that if you're familiar with Operation Northwoods. But if you jump ahead to the early 90s, that's where we say this uninterruptible autopilot was developed and produced. Now, there's actually a Wikipedia article. If you just type in uninterruptible autopilot, this Wikipedia article.
Say that slowly, Dan. Say that slowly, please.
What's that?
Uninterrupted what?
Oh, if you just type in uninterruptible autopilot.
Uninterrupted autopilot.
Right. What will pop up is a Wikipedia article entitled Boeing Honeywell Uninterruptible Autopilot, okay? And it's somewhat misleading. I mean, it comes on and says the stated design purpose is to prevent would-be hijackers from commandeering a commercial jet aircraft in flight by remotely taking control of it and guided to one of many airports in the world to auto-land it, okay? That's the stated design purpose of it. But the article, it's not a long article, but it goes on to say that Boeing patented this system in 2006. Now, anyone reading this article casually would say, oh, look, they came up with an anti-hijacking device because of 9/11, but that's not true because we know it was produced in the mid-1990s. We've had informants come forth from Boeing, Raytheon, and other sources who have actually worked on this system or had firsthand knowledge that existed in 1996 and beyond, well before 9/11. So we know this system exists. We've got the patent on it. We've got the Wikipedia article acknowledging that it exists. And we claim that that's what was used on 9/11 to fly the aircraft into their target. So I wish we had questions people could ask because I kind of went through that quick. But
yeah. So what you're saying is that this technology was available a very long time ago, long before 9/11. This electronic technology to electronically hijack a aeroplane and take control of the direction of the plane.
That's correct. I mean, we say there's no other viable alternative explanation as to how airplanes hit the building. Given
so why would you say that you wouldn't have been able to fly that plane into that building?
Well, let me go into the hijackers now and talk about the Pentagon profile, because that in particular is the maneuver I'm talking about. And I'll give you the reason why it'd be very challenging for even an experienced pilot to do. Let me talk about first Hani Hanjour. He was a 29-year-old Saudi Arabian pilot. He wasn't even a pilot. He came to the States in the mid-1990s to take flight training in small airplanes. And it's well documented that he was a very poor student. ABC News, New York Times, other news outlets were reporting what a poor pilot he was after the fact. And he went back to Saudi Arabia, and he was such a poor pilot that when he came back to the States with the intent of taking additional flight training before 9/11, his original flight school that he went to wouldn't take him because they didn't want to waste assets on him. So Hani Hanjour.
So this is one alleged hijacker who was refused to even be allowed to try and train again because he was so bad in previous lessons.
Right, and he took off. He was supposedly flew American 77 out of Washington Dulles Airport. The airplane took off heading for the West Coast, got to cruise altitude for a while before making an about turn back into, excuse me, Washington, D.C., and started a descent. And when it got to 7,000 feet, it commences this descending, accelerating 330-degree corkscrew turn to arrive. This is the tricky part of the maneuver. The 330-degree turn isn't that big a deal, but the aircraft arrived precisely at the surface, just a few feet off the surface, at over 500 knots without skidding the surface, and flew in at that altitude just above the ground without skidding it to strike the Office of Naval Intelligence on his first attempt. Now, this is this guy that was a poor pilot, but the story keeps getting better because this same maneuver was replicated in a simulator and flown by highly experienced pilots. And every time they tried the maneuver, they crashed the simulator. So we've been expected to believe Hani Hanjour could have done it on his first attempt. So,
and was this the plane what hit the Pentagon?
Yes.
Allegedly.
Yes. And I'll just interject something before I go on with Hani Hanjour here. It struck the Office of Naval Intelligence, which housed the Budget Analyst Office. And the day before 9/11, Donald Rumsfeld held a press conference where he announced $2.3 trillion was missing from the Pentagon budget. And where did the plane hit? That office that housed over 50 of these analysts that were investigating this missing money and killed over 30 of them. Was that a coincidence? Well, Hani Hanjour had to be a pretty good pilot to do that. But getting back to Hani Hanjour, he went to the Freeway Airport in Bowie, Maryland, 1 month prior to 9/11, and wanted to rent a single-engine Cessna 172, a propeller job. And when you go to an airport like this, if they don't know you, you have to prove you can fly So they take you up on an evaluation flight. It isn't a training flight. You got to go up and demonstrate you can fly. Well, he didn't go up on one of them. He went up with two instructors, a woman named Sherry Baxter and a guy named Ben Connor, and on 3 flights over 2 days. And they came back to the chief pilot at the airport, a guy named Marcel Bernard, who I spoke with personally on this, who confirmed the story. And they told him, don't rent him the airplane. He can't handle it. So what did Hanjer do? He goes down the road to Congressional Air Charter, another fixed-base operator, and goes flying with a pilot named Eddie Shalev, who came back from the flight and said, yeah, he's a good pilot. So what now? After this happened, after 9/11, the 9/11 Commission staff and the FBI agents visited these 4 pilots, Ben Connor, Sherry Baxter, Marcel Bernard, and Eddie Shalev, and interrogated them. And they each told their story. And Ben Connor was sure he was going to get a call from the 9/11 Commission. He said the call never came to testify, okay? So what appeared in the 9/11 Commission final report? Only Eddie Shalev's testimony that he was a good pilot. It wasn't taken under oath. It appeared as but an end note in the final report. The rest of it was suppressed by the FBI and Philip Zelikow at the 9/11 Commission. And who was Eddie Shalev? Well, he came to the States 2 months prior to 9/11. He was an Israeli citizen.
Wow.
And disappeared afterwards. We don't know where he went, maybe back to Israel. So the question begs, was he a Mossad agent? We don't know. We'll never know.
Right. Let me just quickly come in on that. So we had a few airline trainers, air pilot trainers, and this alleged hijacker, this Saudi, went to them first, and they said, this guy can't fly properly, do not rent him a plane. He then went off to this other guy, who you're saying is now an Israeli citizen, and he testified in the 9/11 Commission that he was an okay pilot.
He didn't even testify before the commission. They took the notes that had been taken when they interrogated these guys and put it into an end note on the 9/11 Commission final report. He didn't testify before the commission.
Right.
They just took his statement and made a statement in the final report that he was a good pilot, which was a lie. So when I think about United Flight 77, why did it hit the Pentagon? Why didn't they take it to the White House or the Capitol building or some other prominent? But the Pentagon's a military installation, and the U.S. government came out and said, this is an act of war. They've attacked a military installation, okay, which enabled them to launch Operation Enduring Freedom, and over the period of 21 years, kill 110,000 Afghan citizens. So that's the story of Hani Hanjour. Now, you want to get into the other hijackers, there's not a lot to mention there. Mohammed Atta was a ringleader. He's an Egyptian. And he flew American 11 into the North Tower. It was the first plane to hit a building. And his was basically a straight-in approach, flying just under 500 knots to hit building the North Tower. And the other guy was a United Arab Emirates pilot named Marwan al-Shehi, who flew United 175 into the South Tower. Now his was a little bit more challenging because if you'll remember, 12 seconds out, that airplane rolls into a 30-degree angle of bank turn to hit the building, and had that turn not occurred precisely at that time with that angle of bank, somebody's computed that he would have missed the building by 800 feet, that he hit it dead on. And when you think about it, all 3 airplanes hit with cruise missile precision on their first attempt with these rookie pilots. So I want to also mention that the navigation system on today's modern commercial jet aircraft is derived from cruise missile technology, and it's extremely accurate, and it's evidenced on an auto land when the visibility goes way down. Pilots are required by federal regulations to let the airplane auto land. And why do they do that? Because the the autopilot's a better pilot than the pilots are. They can do a better job.
Yeah.
And so
also about Mohammed Atta, he was you know, he was doing cocaine and strippers allegedly the night before of the alleged hijackings, and these guys are supposed to be like radical, extreme, hardline Muslims, and you know they don't do things like that. If you're you know, if you're a practicing Muslim, that intent on taking your life for Islam, I doubt you're going to be doing those sort of things. You know, there is stories that, you know, they were CIA agents or, you know, controlled by Mossad. But we'll get into the theories a bit later on. Carry on.
okay, where was I? I was talking. Oh yeah, you go to the drop-down menu on the website, and we have an airplanes tab there, and we do a comparison of a light 1-ton Cessna 172 compared to a 100-ton 767 aircraft, and just do a comparative analysis of the aircraft. And we say it would be akin to having driven your family car for about a year and then hopping into a huge semi-tractor trailer, an 18-wheeler, get it up to a high speed and try to drive it through a garage without scraping the sides of the truck. That's how accurate it has to be. You'd have to be, or even getting in a Formula One race car you've never driven before and get it up to high speed and try to keep it on the track. They're just two entirely different airplanes with entirely different handling characteristics. But the next item down on the drop-down menu is the cockpits. And we show a picture of a Cessna 172 cockpit with the old round dial instruments and a few radios, okay? And then we show the immensity of a 767 cockpit, and all we say at the bottom of that page is, notice any subtle differences? Well, of course you do. I mean, there's no comparison to think that these inexperienced, unqualified hijackers could hop in that airplane and interpret all those instruments is a joke. And that's what people don't notice. They just go, oh, they got trained in airplanes. They knew how to fly, but there's more to it than that. So what did our organization do? Because you hear all these people, you see all these people on social media arguing back and forth, saying no, it was a cruise missile that hit the Pentagon, no, they were holograms that they were used to fly airplanes or simulated airplanes into the Twin Towers. So you got all these arguments, and I say, what are you doing? Where are you going to take this information? We're arguing, we're getting nowhere doing this. So I'll jump aside for a second and talk about a group called the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. I know all these guys on the board, and I work with them indirectly, but a group of U.S. lawyers got together and compiled evidence and testimony from the biggest 9/11 whistleblower individuals and organizations in the world, and presented 57 evidence packages to the U.S. Attorney in New York, a guy named Jeffrey Berman. When he looked at the information, he was impelled to announce the convening of a grand jury investigation into their allegations that World Trade Center buildings 1, 2, and 7 were brought down by controlled demolition and not by jet aircraft impact damages of the fuel fires that ensued. So what happened? A grand jury investigation is a very secretive process. You don't even know they're going on. You don't even know who the jurists are. Witnesses aren't allowed to talk about the fact they testified before. Well, the committee noticed there was no apparent movement on this grand jury investigation, so they went to the Justice Department and said, hey, what gives? And the Justice Department said, we don't have to tell you. No witnesses were called for. So long story short, over the course of a couple of years, the Lawyers Committee took this thing to court, took the Justice Department to court, and at every turn, they were losing their case. And last year, they took it to the Supreme Court, who refused to hear their case. So at present, they're kind of dead in the water. So they went the legal route. So initially, we were going to take these pilot testimonies that we got on tape and go to them and say, hey, get us before a grand jury. We've got pilots that are saying the hijackers couldn't have flown the airplanes, but they were too encumbered with other things at the time. They couldn't take us on. So we decided, rather than go the legal route, we go the political route and try to appeal to the bureaucrats and politicians in D.C. to get them to investigate our allegations about the uninterruptible autopilot. And we started out with letters, emails, and phone calls. The letters and emails weren't answered. Well, the FAA did initially until they saw what we were saying and then clammed up on us. But phone calls weren't returned. It's like a fortress you can't penetrate. Washington, D.C., if they don't want to talk to you, they just stonewall you. But we went to first the FBI twice. We went to them and they said, took down the information. You know, they said to me, what are you reporting? I said, evidence for a crime. And what's a crime? I go, 9/11. There's a long pause, right? So, you know, okay, what are you claiming? And I said, we're claiming the aircraft were electronically hijacked, remotely controlled, blah, blah, blah. And goes on to, she takes down all this information and she goes, look, we'll call you back if we want any information, and hung up on me, right? So I waited a couple months and called them back. And they brought up the case. They go, you called us before. I go, yeah. They go, look, we told you if we wanted more information, we'll contact you. I said, well, no one's contacted me. They said, she got indignant with me and hung up on me. So I decided to go to the Transportation Security Administration with this uninterruptible autopilot issue. And the guy there was very receptive. And he finally said to me, look, why don't you go to the FAA and Boeing on this? I well, that's a good idea. Because he says TSA doesn't conduct investigations, so I'm not going to drag this out real long. We wound up going to the FAA, which lasted over a year. We went to the FAA administrator. We went to the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Transportation Inspector General, the Director of the National Intelligence, the Attorney General, the Assistant Attorney General Criminal Division, and the FBI. All with these joint letters, emails, phone calls, etc., and we got nowhere. Last January, a year ago January, I had an FAA lawyer on the phone that I had cornered. And he said, look, Dan, you haven't proven that the uninterruptible autopilot was used. I said, well, it's not our job to investigate crime. I said, but we have proven that Hani Anjar couldn't fly, and something hit the Pentagon. How did it get there? Long pause, and he goes, the FAA doesn't conduct investigations, go to the Department of Justice. I said, I've been to them several times. I've filed hotline reports, letters, you name it, and they don't answer. So I live in Islamabad, Pakistan, and people say, what's he hiding out there? No, I'm not hiding out here. Fell in love with and married a Pakistani 14 years ago, and I've lived here ever since. But Pakistan is a country that was hard hit by the war on terror, okay? People don't realize it's the 5th most populated country in the world, 240 million people, and it's the 2nd most densely populated Muslim country in the world that lost over 70,000 lives due to their forced participation in the war on terror. So us saying our mantra that there were no Muslim hijackers controlling the airplane, we thought it would resonate well with the 1.8 billion Muslims in the world. So I wanted to get in to see the Prime Minister of Pakistan, Imran Khan, and I started letter writing and phone calls. Long story short, I had to go through their military secretary to try to get in to see him. And they talked to me once on the phone but didn't get back, so I wrote to the Inner Services Intelligence, which is their CIA, their intelligence agency in Pakistan, a very good agency, as a matter of fact. And they invited me in on March 7th, 2022. And I went in there for an hour and a half with my wife and told them in a nutshell everything I knew, including the uninterruptible autopilot. And they were taking notes, seemed very interested, said, look, the Director General wants to meet you. We're going to get a film crew together for you, do a documentary, blah, blah, blah. And then the very next month, Imran Khan, the Prime Minister, was ousted, and all hell broke loose over here politically, and that was the end of that. So we didn't stop there. There's an organization in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, called the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It's comprised of 57 Muslim countries, and it's like the United Nations of the Muslim world. And the representatives from each of these countries is the Minister of Foreign Affairs from each country. So we wrote to 37 individual Minister of Foreign Affairs, plus the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, saying, look, not only do we're affiliated with a number of other 9/11 whistleblower groups, okay? We've got all this information we're going to lay at your feet with people willing to come forth and testify. Why don't you establish an International Islamic Commission for 9/11 inquiry and a Muslim 9/11 Commission, figuring the groundswell of support amongst 1.8 million Muslims would be profound. Not one of them were game. The ministers didn't answer. I talked on the phone several times. I went to another group called the Muslim World League in Mecca. Same thing. They're not interested. So about a year and a half ago, I ran across a video on the internet, and it had Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, was entertaining the Secretary General of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and its whole contingent in Moscow, saying, hey, we're a friend of the Muslim world, we want to cooperate with you. And I went, aha, that's an idea. So I wrote a joint letter to Sergei Lavrov and the Secretary General, didn't get an answer. So in frustration, I didn't just come up with these ideas. I got other guys in the woodwork that don't want to come out. They want to remain anonymous. But we decided that we would write Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and the two Secretary Generals of these organizations. And of course, we didn't get a response, but that's in the to be continued file, because we do have possible. But the problem right now is, with all the turmoil going on in the world, we're on the brink of a nuclear war. No one's interested in 9/11. You'd think Vladimir Putin, look, all these intelligence agencies around the world have all the information we have and more. There's 195 countries in the world, with the exception of a handful of leaders. None of them have stepped forward. They're not stupid. They've got this information. Why is that? Why won't they? Well, you gotta start thinking to yourself, what are they afraid of? Because it's got to be fear that's keeping them quiet. Well, it depends upon your worldview, who you really believe called in the 9/11 hit. It wasn't George Bush or Dick Cheney or Donald Rumsfeld, okay? It was something much, much bigger than that. So if you want to believe there are individuals or organizations in the world that are huge, they're the most wealthy, powerful, ruthless subhumans on earth that planned this 9/11 hit. Whether you want to believe it was the bloodline families, the Freemasons, the Black Pope, the Jesuits in the Vatican, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Committee of 300, the Bilderbergs, the Rothschilds. I could go on and on with a list of possible suspects. Any or combination of all those got together years ago and came up with this plan for what they were going to do. Now, I personally believe you blamed it all on Israel, but there's too many indicators. You said you read Christopher Boland's book. I didn't, but I've watched him plenty of times on videos. I know what he says.
Yeah, I didn't read his book. I was like you. I watched a lot of his videos, which was basically what was in his book.
Right, and anybody that hasn't read it, it's called Solving 9/11, The Deception That Changed the World, something like that, okay? And it's Bollyn, Boland. And the other book you ought to read is David Icke's book, The Trigger. It's a big book. Again, I haven't read it, but I've watched enough of David Icke to know what he's saying. But I personally believe, as do other members of our organization, that 9/11 was planned and executed by Zionist members of the governments of the United States, Israel, and others through collusion between the CIA, Mossad, and others. Now, you can debate that issue, and I could give you pointers as to why I believe that, but that's what I think they're afraid of, are these huge powers out there behind 9/11 that could either break the country or assassinate the leader. You look at Muammar Gaddafi and Saddam Hussein when they stepped out of line. What brutal ending to their lives. Okay. These other leaders look at that and say, no way, I'm not going to say anything. Or those with the IMF, World Bank, they'll destroy your economy. When you look at the central banks owned by the Rothschilds in the world, they'll destroy your economy. So here we are, ordinary citizens that shouldn't be out investigating this stuff, are doing podcasts like we're doing here right now, because there's agencies of the government that should be doing it instead, but they won't even take our information. I rest my case, Your Honor.
Do you want me to start asking you some questions, Dan?
Sure. Go ahead. I don't know if I can answer.
Let me just give a bit of a background for the audience who might not know this. But there was something called the Annan Plan, which Israel did in the 80s. It's on Wikipedia. You can check this out quite easily. It's called the Annan Plan, and it was a Zionist think tank to to see what the best future for Israel should be. And they clearly said they want to remove Saddam Hussein, all the Arab dictators around Israel, Saddam Hussein, Assad, Gaddafi, Iran's leader, and one or two others. And that was the Yinan plan for a greater Israel. So there's a greater Israel project where they want to expand. The current borders of Israel is going to go right into Syria, right into Egypt, right into Lebanon, other countries as well. So that's the Yinan plan. So they were plotting to attack these dictators who were surrounding Israel in the 80s. And the theory is about 9/11 is it was actually Mossad who did it, in order to trick the West, the US military, the UK military, to invade these countries and take these dictators out. And that's exactly what happened. So, and Mossad's motto is, Mossad is like the CIA of America or the MI6 of the UK. They're the military intelligence organization. And the motto for Mossad, the Israeli intelligence organization, is, by way of deception, thou shalt do war. I mean, that's quite ironic that is their motto and what we are more or less suggesting. So we talked about the black boxes earlier, and you said that they only found one black box, was it, from the airlines?
Well, they found, according to a friend I know, they got data via the Freedom of Information Act, and they recovered the Pentagon black box. It was damaged, but they were able to recover enough data to put together a picture of what they believe happened, which they believe American 77 hit it, while other people believe there was an airborne swap of flight vehicles and a cruise missile hit the Pentagon, okay? But that's one of the black boxes. And then they found a black box, I believe, for the Trade Center, one of the trade centers in Pennsylvania. Don't hold me to this, but they were damaged. The information
Yeah, so just for the audience, on this day, 9/11, 2001, 4 planes were allegedly hijacked. Two of them went into the Twin Towers, one into each tower. One hit the Pentagon, and one went down in a field. Now, not only was the Twin Towers hit and brought down, there was another building called Building 7. And this was a massive building. Like the Twin Towers were extra massive buildings, but the Building 7, I believe, was 52 stories high. So if you've ever been in a tower block and you're on the 15th floor of a tower block, you know how high that is. This block was 52 stories high, and no plane hit Building 7. They said the debris from the falling Twin Towers set fires off in Building 7, which then collapsed like it was a controlled demolition. It was blatantly obvious that it was, to me, that it's a controlled demolition. And so no plane hit Building 7. There was one plane that went down in Pennsylvania in the field, which you mentioned earlier. I personally believe that plane was supposed to go to Building 7, but it didn't get there for whatever reason. And, you know, and because they had planned to detonate these buildings to spark this invasion of the Middle East, they brought it down anyway. And there's all sorts of stories about that as well. There's footage of the BBC reporter saying Building 7's gone down, and it was still in the background behind her on the screen before it had even gone down. I don't know if you've seen that, Dan.
Yes, I have.
Yes, and also Larry Silverstein, multi-billionaire Zionist. These Twin Towers were, I only learned this the other day. This is what I like about this subject. You learn new things all the time. And apparently the Twin Towers had asbestos in them, and people were dying from cancer because of asbestos. So the people who owned the Twin Towers, they couldn't sell these Twin Towers. To remove the asbestos, it was just too expensive to do. So they couldn't do that. They couldn't sell the buildings. They were worthless, these buildings. Nobody wanted them. A few months before 9/11, this guy, Larry Silverstein, who was a Zionist, multi-billionaire, bought the worthless Twin Towers, got them insured for terrorism, and then Christopher Bolin documents this in detail, that Larry Silverstein hired an Israeli security firm who were all ex-Mossad, so they were in control of these buildings all the time. There was even one guy who tried to become a security advisor to the World Trade Center years before, who was ex-Mossad, but he was a convicted murderer from Israel, and he was refused this job. But when Larry Silverstein took over, he then was allowed to become this high-tech security advisor. And so it was basically Mossad, Zionists were in control of the whole area of Twin Towers, Building 7. And also another big piece to the puzzle is that there's no CCTV or pictures of the alleged hijackers on the day in the airports where these planes allegedly got hijacked from. And the CCTV company who owned the company were an Israeli company. And you've said to me before, Dan, that you was aware of this, that there's no actual pictures or CCTV of these. You would have thought they would have easily had pictures of these people coming through the check-in desks, etc. Check-in.
Well, they did have one or two of them. They got still photos of them coming through, a film coming through security, but not one hijacker was filmed getting on an airplane.
Well, I've had a look because I had a bit of a debate with someone, and he got all upset when I said there's no footage or pictures of these hijackers on the day. And there's pictures of them with getting connecting flights to where they was going to get the flights, but not in the actual airport where they was hijacked from. And there's a picture of Mohammed Attar at a cash machine, which is not in an airport. There's another one, a picture of one of them, but it's on the 10th of the 11th. It's not, sorry, it was on the 8th of the 11th, the day before. It wasn't the 9th. So apparently there's just no pictures of them online. I've looked, can't find any. And apparently it's an Israeli company who owned the security CCTV system, and they said it wasn't working on the day. That's why they didn't have any pictures of them. So that's that. Also, there's people who are old enough would remember that there was these phone calls of people on these hijacked planes, like phoning their relatives saying they'd been hijacked. That was one or two phone calls. And people have said to me that you can't, in those days, you couldn't even make a call on a plane. Now, I asked you about this, Dan. You don't know the answer to this, but I'm just putting it out there for the listeners, the viewers, that from what I can remember going on planes all my life, you can't make a call on a flight. But for some reason, these people have just been hijacked, and they say that these hijackers were going into the cockpit and taking over this plane. They were phoning their relatives, screaming, saying we've been hijacked. And, you know, could you make a phone call on a plane? I don't think you could.
I don't believe at altitude you could either, but I can't confirm that for sure. So
yeah. So the big question is, go on, Dan.
Oh, I didn't want to change. I was going to change the subject, but go ahead with what you were going to say, because I was going to go.
Well, the Bin Laden videos. So we was all led to believe that Bin Laden organised this whole thing. He lived in a cave, and after it happened, we were just fed these. It was a handful of videos, maybe 5 or 6 videos of him speaking in Arabic in a cave with a gun next to him, and that was for like 4 or 5 videos. And the whole world was gripped on this video of him allegedly admitting to it, but people say that he didn't ever admit to it. Because how can we clarify what he's saying if we don't speak Arabic, for one? How can we believe these translations they're telling us? Secondly, this message became just audio. There was no footage. If people remember, Bin Laden ended up just giving this message through an audio message, and the whole world was kind of glued to this handful of messages from this person who's supposed to be living in a cave. Yeah. Years later, they said they captured him in Pakistan and they killed him, and then coincidentally they had to put the body at the bottom of the ocean where nobody can find it. Was that true that Bin Laden never actually admitted it, Dan?
Quite to the contrary. 5 times he said he didn't do it. He said, I did not do it. I mean, I think he made statements like he was commending those that did for what they did, but he 5 times denied involvement in the planning or execution of the event. So I heard a long time ago that Army intelligence created those videos, and there's different video, like he was using his left hand when he's right-handed or vice versa, I don't know which, and there's some other minor things on the video that would indicate that maybe it was a lookalike even in the videos that they used. So and another thing about Bin Laden, which is not even up for debate, he was working with the CIA in Afghanistan when they were fighting against the Soviets. You know, you had the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, and Bin Laden was a key figure there, and he was friends with the CIA. There's no question about it. So the day after 9/11, Edward Burak, the former Israeli Prime Minister, he directly blamed Osama bin Laden the very next day. Said, well, we know who done it. It's them. They're in Afghanistan. We're going to have to go and take them out, more or less. That's what he was saying. This is the very next day. And it's like, well, if they knew so much about this, why didn't they stop it? How can they know the very next day that it was bin Laden? Also, another big question is, you know, if these alleged hijackers did not even get on the planes, my theory is, let me tell you my theory, that a Mossad unit either was embedded with these hijackers, or they stumbled across their operation and basically finished it off for them. That's what my theory is. So technically, on the day of the hijackings, these hijackers may have thought that they was actually going to be going through with this, but they was in control of Mossad, and Mossad just basically killed them all, and they didn't even get to the planes. The planes were hijacked, remote controlly, gone into the buildings, and the explosives brought the buildings down. That's that's one of my theories. So, what's your theory, Dan? I try to get away from my theories and stick to facts, which is pretty much what I've given you so far, is a bunch of facts, letting you make a decision on your own. But there were 2 transmissions that went out from the airplane. Muhammad Atta said everybody remained seated, we're going back to the airport, or something in that order. He thought he was making a PA announcement and went out over the air, but that could have been coming from anywhere. And another one was the Pennsylvania crash, where it was a hideous recording of these guys screaming, get out of here, and yelling going on. So
yeah. So another option of my theory could be they did get on the planes, they did try and hijack them, they may have failed to hijack them, but this remote control system kicked in and finished the job for the real people behind the operation.
Right. So
yeah, so I've got a few other things.
Can I go back to the Greater Israel Project and tie it in with October 7th and 9/11? Okay.
Yeah.
You already talked about Odysee on wanting to topple or destabilize the countries that the Greater Israel. If you overlay a map of the Middle East, it overlays on the countries that Pat just mentioned. But the Israelis claim all land from the Euphrates to the Nile River is the biblically prophesied promised land. And that's their rationale for doing what they did. But there was a guy named General Wesley Clark. He was a NATO commander, but he was retired after 9/11. He went into the Pentagon to visit a friend, and this is just weeks after 9/11. And this general said to him, hey, come here, look at this plan we've got. The United States is planning on invading 7 countries over the next 5 years. And he says, for what? He said, I don't know. And people laughed at when he was making this statement.
Yeah, I've seen the footage of General Wesley Clark saying that. The 7 countries were Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Sudan, Iran, and 1 or 2 others. And so a lot of people knew this was going to happen.
Well, they didn't finish the job after 9/11. And I contend that October 7th was a false flag, that was the most heavily guarded fence in Gaza in the world that they breached, and that Israel knew they were going to do it. They got warning from the United States and Egypt that something was coming down. They chose to ignore it and allowed it to happen, just like the United States and Israel allowed 9/11 to happen, so they could justify doing what they're doing with their genocide in Gaza right now. But I personally, and this is just speculation on my part, I personally believe they're going to try to realize the Greater Israel Project by not stopping with Gaza, but going to the West Bank, attack Lebanon. That'll bring Iran, Russia, you name it, all hell will break loose in the area over there. And if you look at what's going on in the Ukraine, Zelensky even said, this is the new Greater Israel, the Ukraine. And they were talking about bringing in millions of Jews into the Ukraine and establishing that as part of Greater Israel. So I believe it's all tied together. That Israel wants a Greater Israel Project realized, and the United States wants to rule the world, or hegemony, or imperialism. 900 bases in 195 countries, or whatever, 130 countries. Plus, someone somewhere along the line, the war on terror, I was told, cost about $6.2 trillion. Somebody reaped financial benefit from that, and it's a military-industrial complex. So, war is a racket, Smith Butler said, and it is.
Yeah. So I just want to clarify that because of the 9/11 attacks, it really affected our lives for America and the UK. Thousands of soldiers lost their lives and were seriously injured. Millions of innocent civilians were killed because of the invasions of the Middle East, which was a repercussion from 9/11. and then that sparked off further attacks in Europe from Muslims because of that. And we've also had a lot of our freedoms taken away. Now, if we leave our country and come back, the police can just take our phones off us at the airport when we re-enter the country, and if you don't tell them the passcode for your phone or your electrical devices, you will be convicted of a terrorist act. This is all because of 9/11. So we've lost a lot of freedoms. You know, they can hold us without charge in police stations for much longer now because of 9/11. So this whole thing, you know, which I believe was committed by Mossad, has really affected our lives. I've got a few other things we've missed out. The passport, you know, they were so desperate for us to believe that these hijackers hijacked the planes that they even said they found one of their passports which fell out the plane onto the pavement of New York City when it hit the towers. So, you know, the plane's gone into the building, it's exploded, and this passport intact managed to fall out the plane window and onto the pavement. That's how they said they knew one of these hijackers on the plane. That's very suspicious. Also, the dancing Israelis. The dancing Israelis were a group of Middle Eastern-looking men who were celebrating and filming the towers coming down. A woman saw them out the window. She thought they were Arabs, and she thought it was suspicious. She phoned the police. The police came. They arrested them. They turned out to be Israeli citizens. One or two of them were Mossad agents. This is all confirmed. This is all fact. And they then went on to a TV show in Israel, and they said, what was you doing there? Filming the twin? They said, oh, we was there to document it. And two of them are confirmed Mossad agents. There was another couple of Israelis on the day, driving along towards George Washington Bridge in a van, stopped by the police. The van was full of explosives. These were Mossad agents. All of these people who was arrested after 9/11, the days after, they was all released eventually and allowed to go back to Israel. I mean, it's so obvious for me. There's so many things that points the finger towards Israel and not these alleged hijackers. But I think Mossad cleverly, you know, duped these Muslim hijackers into thinking they was doing this job, and they wasn't really in control. That's what I believe.
Right. Right.
And another thing I would like to mention is that when people kept telling me, oh, 9/11 was an inside job, so that to me meant that the American government did it, yeah. And I couldn't accept. This is why I didn't really want to look into it. I couldn't accept that there would be, you know, American agents, FBI, CIA agents, whatever, involved with the killing of 3,000 civilians in the Twin Towers. So that's why I think it's more points the finger at Mossad. However, there may have been some involvement from CIA or whatever. And this is the question I would like to, what I asked you before, which you said you're not sure about, but maybe there's an official secrets act. If you're on a mission, you've got to sign an official secrets act. If you speak about this mission, what you've been on, you're going to get 45 years in prison. Who knows? You know, because they do have an official secrets act in our country, I believe. So maybe there was something like that. I don't know. But that's more or less it, really. Do you want to add anything else, Dan?
No, not really. If people want to get a hold of me, because that's how usually people get a hold of me to do these programs, you can go to Twitter. I'm on there at Dan Hanley 4. I'm on Facebook at Dan Hanley, and we got that contact us page on the website. You can contact us that way, or if you got a question you want to ask, or comment you want to make. So that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I'll just put your Twitter link in the chat. That's it in the chat, guys. That's Dan Hanley's Twitter in the chat. Go ahead, Dan.
No, I just want to say thanks for having me on, Pat. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that you've come on, because I think it's a fascinating story, and I think the more people look into it, the better. because, like I say, they've caused a massive confrontation between like the European people and the Muslim world, and
Right.
we've been tricked into it, and it's wrong. And Mossad's motto is, what is it? By way of deception, thou shalt do war. So guys, sounds pretty suspect to me. So yeah, I mean, I'll just say hello to the chat, everybody in the chat, and there was someone right at the beginning. I'll put his. So yeah, hello Timmy and Serena, Budgie Burger, Rory, Steve Wild, Farmers Movement Cornwall, Gerald Fisher, Tommy Trump, Mark Williams, Ugly Truth, Tommy Trump, John Skidmore, Dave 101. All right, Dave, good to see you there. St. Thomas Aquinas. Yeah, it's been a good stream, I think. All right, Big Vinny. Hello, Vinny. So, would you want to take any questions from the chat, Dan?
Oh, sure.
So, if anybody's got any questions, we'll do another 5-10 minutes, and just give us a question in the chat, and we'll ask Dan what your question is.
While we're waiting, Pat, I'm just going to reiterate what our website is, 911pilots.org. It's an easy read, and we got videos on there. If you go to the website, read it, watch the videos, we're convinced that we will convince you what we're saying is true.
Yeah. So go to his website. I did put the link to the website in there a minute ago. Let me see if I can find it again. Is it that one? There it is there. Let me put it in there again. So check out Dan's website. I'll put it in the chat now. So Dan's Twitter link is in the chat, and Dan's website link is in the chat. Dave 101 is asking, do you trust your government, Dan?
No.
Silly question.
Absolutely not. And it didn't start with 9/11. It started with the Vietnam War. I'm showing my age, but yet. I will mention this. I'm 75 years old. I don't need to be doing what I'm doing right now. And I feel like I know too much about the lies of 9/11 to remain silent. And as far as security goes, I get stopped for interrogation by the FBI and TSA every time I enter. Okay, somebody's asked me, have I read Judy Wood's book? I haven't read it, but I know what she's all about. And it's tragic that the 9/11 truth movement have shunned her, because I believe there's some truth to what she said. You look at the fact, I wasn't going to go here, but you look at the fact, you got these two buildings that are over 100 stories tall, made of concrete and steel, that was dustified, falling at near the free acceleration rate due to gravity, all the way to almost to the surface in 11 seconds, in a debris pile that was only 3 stories high that should have been 30 stories tall. So I personally believe, I normally don't announce this, but I personally believe William Rodriguez's explosion that he talked about in the basement prior to the first airplane hitting, directed energy, and we didn't talk about nanothermite, but I believe it was a combination of all of them that brought the buildings down.
Yeah. No, I was aware of the directed energy weapons theory. I personally think it's the nanothermite, which because like 3 months after the Twin Towers came down, they were still smouldering, and I remember this. I was watching the news, and I'm thinking, what are those smoke? Why is there still smoke coming out of it 3 months later? And this was the fires they couldn't put out because it was like molten lava, like you said, Dan. And
right.
This is how Anthony Boleyn tested the debris and found this super nanothermite, which is high grade military explosives, which is what he says. And also the Michael Chertoff, another Zionist who was in control of the whole of Port the New York Port Harbor, he didn't order a crime investigation. He just decided to remove all of the rubble and steel onto barges and took it to the Asia to be recycled, when it should have been investigated, because this super thermite should not be in the rubble if there was no explosions. Is that correct, Dan?
That's correct. Yeah, and Michael Churchoff was the Assistant Attorney General Criminal Division that was assigned by Bush just a few months prior to 9/11 to that position. He is a dual U.S.-Israeli citizen, and his mom was a founding member of Mossad.
Yeah, I mean, check out Christopher Bollin as well. If you look into all the people, you know, who are in the positions of authority, the Port Harbor, the Twin Towers, the CCTV for all the airports, all Israeli Zionists. And, you know, it's very suspicious. So there's one there. Have you ever been prosecuted, Dan, for speaking out?
No, but let me tell you what happened to a captain named Philip Marshall. He was a 67 captain at United Airlines and had written 2 books on 9/11 and was about to publish a 3rd one. He told his neighbors and his ex-wife he was being threatened. A few days later, the neighbors found his family dog and 2 kids shot to death, and Philip had a bullet in his head, and the police deemed it was a murder-suicide, that he killed his kids and turned the gun on himself. And guess who the California Attorney General was at the time that didn't investigate the crime any further? Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. So you read into that whatever you want. But I've never been prosecuted. I've never been prosecuted. I don't think I would be saying as much as I am right now if I was living in the States, because they kill people for talking out. I mean, it's no secret they do. They kill whistleblowers. So, but I was told if the CIA wants you dead, you're dead. I was told that by a reputable intelligence agent. So if they wanted me dead, they would have killed me by now. So I just keep doing. I've done about 50 of these podcasts and have never gotten a threatening phone call. Although the first time in years that my wife and I were planning on returning to the States, the very day I made a plane reservation out of Islamabad to Doha to Atlanta, the FBI in Washington calls my ex-wife there and wanted to know everything about the trip. And I'm like, whoa, how did they even know I was coming, right? So I called the FBI in Washington and said, what's up? I hear you're looking for me. And they were very taken back. And how'd you know that? And I said, my sister called me and told me my ex-wife told her. So they wouldn't tell me anything. So I said to my wife, watch it, something's going to happen when we get to the States. And sure enough, we get into Atlanta and we're in passport control. My wife went over to the foreigners line. I'm standing in the U.S. citizens line. And a few minutes later, this man and woman brings my wife over and said, Dan Hanley? I go, yeah. And they whip out their badges. And one was an FBI agent. The other one was a TSA agent, which bewildered me because not only did they know what flight I was coming in on, they knew what I was looked like, and my wife recognized both of us, and they said, you got time for questions? And I go, sure, I was expecting you. And they said, well, come with us. So they opened up the cordoned off area, and we went over to a desk to the passport guy. There was no line. They said, here, stamp your passports. And when the guy got into the computer, he looked up the FBI agent and goes, hey, this guy's red? He goes, yeah, we know. So that didn't sound good. I didn't say I said, what does that mean? But I don't think it was a term of endearment. They took me in a room. They knew everything about me. And I thought it was over after they questioned me. But a month later, we're leaving the States and we're walking down a busy concourse, and another FBI agent and TSA agent, they knew what flight we were leaving and knew what I looked like again, come up behind me and said, you got time for questions? I go, yeah. So they took me in a room this time for about a half hour, and they knew everything about me. They knew I'd been in the Navy for 10 years, thanked me for my service, said we respect your First Amendment freedom of speech rights, and they kept asking me, have you ever been threatened? And I go, well, no, why should I be? And they go, no, we were just curious, but It just told me that I'm on their watch list, but I'm not intimidated by that because I haven't done anything wrong. I'm exercising my First Amendment freedom of speech rights.
Yeah.
And I'm doing a job that the U.S. government and other governments should be doing.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. And we've had a lot of people watching. We've got like, 250 people watching, which is pretty big figures for us. And we've got 228 watching on Twitter. So just hello to everyone on Twitter. We are a political party. We stand in local elections, and we are anti-Zionist. We're anti-NATO, which is controlled by Zionists. We want to leave NATO, and we want to nationalise the British Army. We don't want the British Army going and fighting in Ukraine or Israel or any of these places. We want the British Army, the British Navy, to be protecting our borders at the Channel, because we're being invaded by dinghies at the moment. I don't know if you know about that, Dan, but we're getting invaded by these dinghies who claim asylum, and they just get put in hotels. We've had about 180,000 of them so far. Anyway, thanks for coming on, Dan, and follow Dan on Twitter. Follow him on Twitter. Check his website out. Join the mailing list. All the links I have put in the chat. So just look back in the chat and you'll find all his links. And thank you very much, Dan. Do you want to say anything else for last words?
No, I just want to thank you and thanks people in chat that tuned into us. And please go to the website and have a look at it. And if you like what you see, pass it on to your family, friends, and neighbors, and post it on your favorite social media outlets. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay then, Dan, I'm going to close the stream now. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Please comment with your theories after this. You've watched this stream on YouTube. Put a comment in. Tell us what you think your theory is, and share it on Twitter and whatever social media platform you're on. And I'm going to end the stream now. Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you, Pat.